Okay, so we're recording and okay. So first off, I'm kind of curious. How'd you fill out the test? Nobody. Okay. Hopefully, it's a quick way of you getting these grades, but it also hopefully forces you back into the graph editor a little bit. I want to talk about a couple of things. One being our schedule. You'll notice today is the 26th, which means we have just a little over 2 weeks to get this done. It currently says that we're looking at the punch today, but we're not. We're going to look at the run, just because I'm kind of shifting some stuff around a little bit. Next class period, we'll probably look at the punch and the jump animations, because those aren't nearly as long to look at. And then Tuesday of next week, a week from today, there's a chance we're going to do this. We're going to kind of fill it out and see how much we can get through in the next class period. If Tuesday is a work day, what we'll actually end up doing is that same thing we did with the discussions, or that same thing we were going to do with the discussions before I got sick, where it was snow, wasn't it? That's why we had to cancel last week. Where you'll come in, you'll log on, you'll upload your stuff. Hopefully you already have your stuff uploaded to Sync Sketch. I'll give everybody a few minutes to put them on the discussion board, and everybody will get some time to go through there and give everybody feedback. That's either going to happen on Tuesday, or if we're sort of pressed for time, what will happen is that will kind of be the thing you have to do after the critique on Thursday. So we'll do the critique, and then the way you can give people extra feedback so they can do a revision will be on the thing that they turn in for the final. So something else is happening on the Thursday before spring break, right there. One, that's when the project is due, right? And so I still like to have the due date before spring break, because that means you get something done, and if you have time over spring break, you can always do revisions and turn it back in when we come back from that. But you all know the other thing that's happening on that day and Friday. So Thursday and Friday before spring break is the midterm portfolio reviews. So again, how many of you have never been to a portfolio review? Anybody? Okay, well, that's good news. I'm going to encourage you to come again, especially particularly since there are so many people presenting in animation, and most of them are currently sitting in this room. If you go and bring back some evidence, which I don't think I told my last class evidence, and it's not like a lock of Megan's hair. It's like a selfie with everybody in the background or something like that, so I know you were there. Or you can write up sort of a little short description of it. I will say people have tried to trick me on the selfie one before. Like, it wasn't a good trick. It was a student who was walking out as I was showing up one day for the portfolio reviews, and he held up his phone and he's like, "Is this what you meant by the selfie?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he just turned around and left. And I was like, "Well, you were supposed to take a selfie and then stay and watch some of them." So that was implied. Now I'll just say it directly. So you're there enough time to watch a handful of them, 3 or 4. You never know, you may stay and watch all of them. If you do that and bring back some evidence, I'll give you extra credit. It would basically be 1 extra point on whatever your lowest project grade is. So let's say project 2, you really botch the jump animation and you just get 1 out of 5 points. I'll bump that 1 up to a 2 just to raise your grade. Considering that's a 20 out of a 25 points, it's really like I'm giving you 4 extra points on a grade. So that's the benefit of that. That's how much I really believe that it's important you go to these. I will do that for this midpoint or midterm portfolio review, or the end portfolio review, which happens in week 15, the week right before finals week. So it's it's Thursday and Friday of both of those days, or both of those times. So Thursday, it would be 5:15 till whenever everybody's done. And then on Friday, we start back, I think it's at 9 a.m., is that correct? Yeah, bright and early, bring some coffee. I personally am not crazy about the 9 a.m. on the Friday before spring break, but it gives people a chance to come to them who maybe have to work at night or something like that. So, questions, comments? Okay. One other thing I wanted to look at really quickly. I posted this, and I think I sent out an email to everybody. This is the other class, but it's the same in both of them. Kenny Roy just released a whole bunch of animation videos. So whatever it is you're like obsessively watching on YouTube, just hit pause and watch these instead for a few weeks. Like, these are freaking incredible. Like, they used to be $10 each, and he just gave away 350 of them. So that's $3,500 worth of videos. I'm not joking when I say like these are amazing. Like, this is, I went to Animation Mentor after I graduated from grad school. He was one of the mentors at Animation Mentor, and the stuff he's giving away for free is what they charge $15,000 for. Like, you need to watch every one of these videos. They're super incredibly awesome. This is the stuff that, like, you can find a video for how to use a tool inside of Maya. You can just Google any YouTube video for that. He's sharing the stuff that you get from like working at DreamWorks, right? He's sharing the workflow processes. He even invents some of his own workflows and puts those out there as options for people to work with. He created a workflow method he calls tempo, which basically is animating your entire scene with simple shapes so you can nail down your timing, and then basing your character animation on the timing you get out of those simple shapes. Which sounds really weird, but it's the same thing that you get when you're animating, or when you were a kid playing with like toys and you're like, right? Like, we understood the timing of that. It's kind of doing that in animation and then making your character animation match that. So he's got some great stuff. I really, really, really strongly encourage you to look at this. Some of the questions that came up in last class is how to use constraints. Turns out he made a better video on it than I could ever make. You should go watch it. I watched the FKIK switching one that he has in there, and his method of doing it is better than the method that I use, and I'm going to switch the way that I do it now. Like, I really think you need to check these out. Like, so I just wanted to point those out in case that email fell into your spam filter or became one of those things that you just deleted. Definitely look at those. All right. So this is where I'm at right now. You may not be here, that's fine. I just went ahead and made some of my key poses. This is in no way finished. Actually, what I have here is just some basic key poses for a run cycle. And actually, there's a couple of things I'm probably going to change on it, like that pose right there. Anyway, what I wanted to look at today for this lecture is, let me get my folder back up for it, is I wanted to talk about walks and locomotion cycles. So we'll start with a walk because almost everybody in here has probably animated a walk before, right? And you animated one for animation or principles of animation, and if you didn't, you probably ended up doing one for BinBot and animation fundamentals, or at the very least, you just opened up a free rig at some point and tried to do a walk cycle. So you have all heard me go on my spiel about the different poses that make up a walk cycle before. How many of you can remember them? It's 4 of them.
Up, down.
Up, down, contact, and passing, right? So, and in the order that we're usually seeing them in the illustrations, they are, oh, sorry. This is from the Animator Survival Kit. Contact, down, passing, up, and then we get back to the contact in order to make that, that whole sequence. Now again, this is just one step. So to do a cycle, we need two, right? We need contact down, passing up, and then we need the contact down, passing up again. I wanted to briefly look at these poses, just talk about them kind of quickly, look at some of the elements of them. Your contact pose is the first point at which your front foot contacts the ground, right? That's why we call it that. It's also one of the last points at where your rear foot is contacting the ground, because this is where the transition of weight happens. This is where your rear foot, which was supporting you up to this point, is sort of going to stop supporting you, and it's going to let your front foot support you. The important thing to remember about any walk cycle is that your arms do the opposite of what your legs do. Right? If your right foot is forward, your right arm is backwards, and so you get this countering in your limbs that cause contrapposto to happen, or causes contrapposto to happen. After your contact pose is your down pose, right? You are passing your weight to that front foot. You sink into that front foot as it takes the weight of your step forward. It's the lowest point in the walk cycle, so that means your down pose, like your hips and your head, are the lowest that they will be. And you'll see that your rear foot is sort of finishing kicking off, right? You have that friction that you're using to push yourself forward. Well, now your toe is sort of flipping off behind you because you finished that follow through that motion, right? You'll also notice your arms kind of flare out just a little bit more. The way I like to think of that is if you were standing like in an A pose and suddenly like your knees kind of gave out on you and you dropped a little bit, right? Your arms are going to kind of umbrella up and then follow through, right? So that's kind of what's happening with the down. As your hips drop, gravity just hasn't caught up with your arm, or the overlapping action just hasn't caught up with your arms yet and let gravity pull them down. Your passing pose is the only pose that is imbalanced. It's the only pose I could sustain for a reasonable amount of time, right? And because of that, you have to be shifting your weight over the supporting leg. Right? So as we shift back and forth between left leg, right leg, as we're stepping, right, your weight is shifting over those legs as well. It's called the passing pose because all of your limbs are passing each other. Right? Your front foot is moving backwards, your rear foot is moving forward, your arms are passing at your side. Everything is sort of passing each other to go back to the other position. I usually like to think of a walk in two different ways. One of the phrases that I've always liked is a walk is just a perpetual fall forward, right? If you start to fall forward, you have to catch yourself, right? Or you're just going to face plant. And so the up pose is your body trying to get your leg out in front of you to catch yourself. One of the ways that you can do that is by pushing yourself up on your toe just a little bit, but probably nowhere near as much as in this example. This example kind of exaggerates the down and up pose a little bit too much. But you can tell that what's happening is they're kind of throwing their leg out in front of them to catch themselves. I also like to think of a walk cycle as kind of like a pole vault over your supporting leg. If you look from the down to the passing to the up and then the final contact, what it really feels like is that you're using your rear leg to pole vault yourself over your front leg and catch yourself again, right? And so you kind of get this repetitive thing that happens. You're just launching yourself over each leg and catching yourself at the end of that, right? And then we're back to the contact again. So again, it takes two of these. It takes two of these sequences to get a full cycle, because we have to get back to the point from where we started. We just go through it once, our other leg is forward, not the leg we started with, right? This is when we talk about pose-to-pose animation, we usually think of it as a creative decision, right? You're using reference or whatever, but all of your poses are usually this creative thing that you have control over. Do I want my character's chest up more and their arm out more and all of that stuff? This is a pose-to-pose animation as well. The difference is that these poses are defined for you by the nature of physics, right? Has anybody ever known a small baby that was learning to walk? Just known isn't interesting. Like, you don't have long conversations with them, like observed, yeah. Like that's really hard for them, right? And it's because they have to be able to go through all of these phases, all of these different poses, in order for a walk to actually work. If you were to take one of these out, if you were to try to walk without one of these, it's not physically possible. Like these are the elements that have to exist in order for a walk to function. And that's why it takes babies so long to learn it. It's like maybe they figured out the contact and the passing, but that down is still like not something they're figuring out. And then when they try to walk without that, they fall over, right? Now, and again, that sounds like they're like reading some textbook on how to learn to walk. It's really all trial and error. And what that means is that little bits at a time, we try this, we try this, we try this. And if you ever watch a 5-year-old walk, they're not super graceful at it either, but they get better, right? Like we all got a little better at it. And now you're used to seeing people who are experts at walking. Like even if they don't do it a lot, they're still experts at it because they've been doing it for 15, 20 years, however old they are. And we see that all the time. Like just coming to class, you probably saw dozens, if not hundreds of different people walking, right? So we become really good at noticing it when it is wrong. So that's a little frustrating because walk cycles are one of the earliest things I ever had you animate. I gave you, like you modeled a robot character and I'm like, cool, make it walk, because it's really hard to do that. It's one of the first things you learn how to do, but it just takes a long time to master it. And so that's why you will do multiple walks in your life, runs, whatever. So again, contact down, passing up. Let's go ahead and watch some of these in slow motion. All these videos, actually, I just pulled down from Endless Motion, Endless Reference, which is a YouTube video series. And so you can see all of those poses in here. Contact down, passing up, contact down, passing up. So let's look at some here, just so we can find one. So we'll go contact, right? Then he absorbs the weight and pushes off with the back foot, down. Passing, where all the limbs pass each other. Whoa. Really? Passing, where all the limbs pass each other, right? The up pose, which is probably right about there, right, where he's trying to throw that leg out in front of him to catch himself, and then the other contact, right? So, again, these are poses that are physically necessary for a walk to look believable and look accurate. However, and so we can look at it on this character, and we can find it on any character that we want to make walk, right? Here's some more from Endless Reference again. Contact down, passing up. Contact down, passing up. So you can see those happening in each of these characters. Now we're going to talk here in just a minute about some of the differences in this. So I think it's really important first to establish, though, that these are not optional, right? I have plenty of times seen people who do like the contact and the passing, and they're like, that looks close enough, I must be done. All of these elements are necessary for a reason. The things that, so like even if you're animating something that is not necessarily a human, right? Let's say you're animating a weird robot, right? More than likely you're going to find the contact, the down, the passing, and the up. Even like a horse or a cheetah, although it's in sections, there's the front legs and the back legs, you're going to find the contact, the down, the passing, and the up on each of those parts of the body. As many times as I've said contact, down, passing, up, I feel like you'll probably remember that for a little while, and you usually get most of those, but all of those are in there. What we have the option of doing is sort of changing the flavor of each of those, right? So that's something I do need you to recognize, is that a sad walk still has a contact, a down, a passing, and an up. It just has a sad version of each of those poses. I don't know if sad's the right word here, but this feels a little more like it's been a long day at class, right? But each of these are still there. Contact, down, passing, up, over and over again. So really, when we are trying to add personality to stuff, it's really just adding some posing on top of those poses, right? Some secondary elements that allow it to read as that. So let's look at a couple of personality walks in slow motion. And I'm curious, what do you think the motion or emotion is in this, although it said it in the title? How do you think this dude feels? Sad. He's kind of like, it's called exhausted. To me, it kind of feels almost more like defeated. Like he's like, he lost the battle, like whatever it was. So what is it making us feel that way about it?
Like the posture, he's slumped over with his shoulders.
So yeah, a lot of it is that like slumped down. Remember when you had to pose Benbot with those 5 poses? Everybody, a lot of people went for some variation of sad, right? And one of the ways you do sad is you have him looking down at the ground and you kind of get that line of action feeling curved forward, right? He has that. A couple of other things that you may or may not notice. His arms just feel dead, right? They're just like dangling, right? He's not really doing anything specific with them. And his feet feel heavy. Like he continues to push back. Like his rear foot stays on the ground much longer and gets way back there behind him before it comes up in front of him. And then when it does, it's like it barely makes it in time to catch him. It's like he doesn't get it out there in front of him. It's more like he gets it underneath him so he doesn't hit the ground, right? And those elements are making him feel tired. Now there's some other elements that are in here that are worth talking about. And it's kind of hard to find the right way of phrasing some of it, because there are some elements in this, like even if we were to take away all of his physical characteristics, there's actually studies with this. If this were just on a mannequin character, like pretty consistently, people can identify whether this is a male or female, or is moving in a way that is sort of culturally identified as masculine or feminine, right? And some of the elements that are there are anatomical, and some of them are based off of like mass. So for example, his steps, his feet are kind of just like, they're staying wider apart, right? The distance between his feet from side to side, especially in these front poses, are a little bit wider, right? The other element of that is his weight distribution. Like, he's a bigger guy, like he's got more mass than, he's just a massive guy. And a lot of that mass he carries higher up in his body, or at least higher, like he's got a little bit more mass in his chest and shoulders, like a little bit broader shoulders. A little less broad hips, right? Even those, so because of that, because he has this wide stance and more mass, when he walks, he shifts his weight from side to side a lot. Like if you kind of look at how he shifts his weight from one side to the other, it's a big shift. So that wide stance and a big weight shift from side to side is typically identified as masculine or sort of the that area of it. Again, I think it's important to recognize that when we talk any of these characteristics, think of them on a slider scale, right? So there is a difference between a little bit bummed and devastated, right? And so you can kind of crank that slider up, right? You can crank him into a little bit more depressed or really depressed or absolutely devastated, right? And that feels like a value that you can turn up and down. This difference between masculine and feminine on this walk is also a slider, right? So he's not walking the furthest extent of quote unquote masculine. Like that's probably like that Bugs Bunny with the Western doing a what's it called where they shoot each other the 10 paces and yeah, whatever. It's one of the that's probably the most exaggerated extent of that spectrum. So we can go to this next animation, and even though it's in slow motion, there's a couple of things that we can identify with this. What's her emotion? Murder. So she's angry, right? We can tell that from things that aren't even in her face. Like she's doing that. She has like an emotion in her face, but the way she's leaning forward, right? There's that. The fact that she's not got a ton of motion in her shoulders or in her upper arms, but she's got a lot in her forearms. Feels like it's very directed by her fists, like her fists are almost leading that action. And the way she contacts the ground almost feels like a stomp. So I mean, there's a lot of, and also just the fist, like she's holding her hands in a fist. So we are really good at spotting these things, right? And I think it's really interesting to study stuff like this and studying that in your reference so you can apply that to yours as well. But still recognize that all of this has contact down, passing, and up. It's just a different flavor of contact down, passing, and up. Now looking at her walk, again, even at this level, if we were just looking at this on a mannequin character, most people can identify this as either masculine or feminine. And the elements that cause that to happen are the fact that her feet are a little closer together when she takes steps. If you push that to the furthest extent of that spectrum, think of the runway walk, where it's almost like you're walking on a tightrope, right? Like you're putting one foot in front of the other. Hers isn't quite doing that, but they are closer together in her steps, right? Again, part of that's cultural, part of that's anatomical. Women generally have a slightly different pelvic construction. So that means their hips are a little bit wider, and since their feet are closer together, they don't have to shift their weight as much. They're just rotating their hips more. And so if you put your hips at an angle, that means because of contrapposto, you have to put your shoulders at that countering angle. And so you're going to get more contrapposto in a female walk, right? Or a feminine walk. So even with all of that, if we just had this on a completely mannequin character with no characteristics, there's actually, I don't know if it's still up, there used to be a study that had this. They were using motion capture data that you could sort of skew between those two extremes, and they were testing this blindly on people. It was basically sticks that were walking, and people could identify pretty closely on a spectrum of gender based off of that. So these are things that we recognize and subconsciously, not even consciously, identify with different characteristics of people, right? Whether it's their emotion, whether it's part of just the way that they are as humans. Again, this is not saying that your character has to be an A or a B, right? Your character may be just slightly on the feminine side of their walk or slightly on the masculine side. And it doesn't have anything to do with how you, it's all about how you want that character to portray as a character, right? It's very easy to just say it's A or B, and you make a kind of cardboard cutout of a character. Adding these nuances are the things that will make your character seem more interesting and more have more depth, right? So all of that is in there, and all of that is up to you to leverage in how you create your contact down, passing, and up poses, right? Now, I just spent a long time talking about walk cycle, and you're probably like, did anybody tell him we're not supposed to do a walk, we're supposed to do a run? Yeah. It doesn't matter. This is a locomotion cycle. A jog, a run, if your character is running backwards, a skip, if your character is strafing from side to side, all of those have contact down, passing, and up, right? So when we look at our run cycle, this is what we get. Now, I actually disagree in which of these are the contact down, passing, and up. They're defining up based off of the height of the head. And to me, if you're only creating 4 keyframes and you don't have frame number 6 in there, then it's not going to be understandable as a run. One of the defining characteristics of a run, the only reason you can't take a walk and just make it faster, is that a run means all of the legs, all of the feet are off of the ground at the same time, right? At some point in this animation, both of the feet are off the ground at the same time. And to me, that's something you need to define. So I have a different set of keyframes that I use, but you're seeing that they're all in here, right? The contact point, the down point, the passing, and then the up. All of that is still in there. Like, you're still able to track down the things that are necessary to show that motion. The things that I would also point out in this is that this can all be tied back to a bouncing ball, right? If we look at it, our contact pose, that is the stretch right before the ball hits the ground. The down, pose number 2, that's the squash, right? The stretch where the ball bounces back up is frame number 5, the up, where it's pushing off, or what they're calling the up, where it's pushing off the ground. And frame number 6, where it's up in the air, that's the up in the air pose for the ball, right? In fact, you can use sort of those key poses to get a run cycle, and if you push it even more cartoony, you can pretty much use a bouncing ball as your reference for how your character will run. We're going to see these elements in real poses. Like, I really love the Muy Bridge stuff because you can still like, all of this is still relevant, right? People didn't run differently 100 years ago, right? It's all still relevant. I actually use the horse reference from Animal Locomotion as a reference image for one of the horse animations I did for Civ 5. So all this stuff is still relevant, and you can still find some good stuff in here. One of the interesting things to notice on this is the contact pose. Like, we kind of miss it. Like, it's somewhere in between 5 and 6 here. But in this, it appears that the character's leg never goes completely straight. And that's probably because this character is running as fast as they can, right? So if you contact the ground with your leg completely straight and you hit heel first, that actually slows you down a little bit. It's how most people still run. Like, if you were to film almost everybody in this room running, they're probably still going to run that way. But if you train somebody to run really fast, they actually run like toe to toe, because then you don't slow your own momentum down with every step. So we'll see some of that here in a minute. But that's one of the reasons that this looks a little different and we're not seeing this extended leg on the contact pose. I found just a bunch of reference, and you see there it does go kind of straighter when he goes to his contact pose, right? Again, I think this guy's probably running for health more than he's running for speed. So we're seeing most of these poses again, and you have to recognize the difference between a walk and a run is that both feet come off the ground. So that's why speed walking looks different than jogging, right? Jogging, both of your feet come off the ground too, usually. The interesting thing about this is the faster you run, the less your body goes up and down. Right? And if you think about that, that makes sense, right? If you watch Usain Bolt run or something like that, he has gotten it down to a science that as much of his energy as he can use He uses as much of his energy as he can to direct his motion forward, not up and down, right? That's wasted energy. And so the faster a character runs, usually the less you're going to see that up and down motion. I can show you a couple other references, just some stuff to look at. You can see this is not really for speed, but you can see that he's not necessarily hitting on his heel. Well, let me go back and. He's not necessarily hitting on his heel, he's hitting kind of on the toe and then running back to the foot. I think that lets him get a little bit more of that speed. So I'm going to skip forward just a little bit here. Some really neat stuff to notice here. I mean, again, she's moving up and down a little bit, but not nearly as much as like one of us would be just jogging, right? And then here, I just think this is neat. Like even jumping these hurdles, her head isn't moving that much up and down, right? Keep in mind that all that really is an exaggerated pose on her up in the air pose, right? Look at him. Like, watch his toe hit the ground. Like, he's running on his tiptoes, and to make sure he's getting enough push off, he's practically kicking himself in the butt. Look at that. And then watch when his toe hits the ground here. He's kind of like scooping his foot underneath him, right? Well, I kind of missed it. So again, none of that stuff is, see, like he's hitting his toe first. So none of that stuff is saying that that is how your character has to run. Recognize that these are ways that you can adjust it. Is your character somebody who runs for a living, or is your character somebody who never runs at all and this is very uncomfortable for them, right? Is your character somebody who's running because they're after someone, or somebody who's running because they're running away from something, right? These are all questions that you can ask that will allow you to change the flavor of your run. So, I thought I would take a minute or two here to show you what I have on mine and show you ways that I can edit that. So again, I'm not super happy with my up in the air pose, like that one there. I think I've probably made her stride just a little too big. I was going for something a little more cartoony, but I'll go ahead and adjust that just a little bit. And the way you can see is, like, if I go from here to here to here, I want that to feel pretty, like it flows pretty well, right? There we go. So that's feeling a little bit better. And then to me, that one was just way too big. There we go. So that's feeling a little bit better. So there are a couple of tricks or tools that I can show you in this that will let you optimize this and clean this up a little more easily. So I kind of alluded to some of this earlier, but what I'm going to do right now is delete all of my keyframes that are not this run, just so I can show you how this tool works a little bit better. So I will go in here, select, I think I saved it in here, yeah, select everything. I want to make sure that there's a key at the beginning and end of this, so I'll hit S on both of those. And then all the stuff before and all the stuff after this, I'm just going to delete. Oh. Quit. Okay, so that means now from 500 to 524, those 25 frames right there, that's going to be my entire run cycle. But if I were to start back here before and hit play, you'll see nothing happens, then we get that one cycle, and then nothing happens, right? So let's go ahead and open up my animation view on this. And you'll see that the reason that happens is because before and after this, on our infinity, is it's just set to flat, right? If I were to choose a curve in here, let's choose this thing here, my rotate x, let's try translate x, you'll see that before this, completely flat, it plays my curve completely flat, right? What I actually want instead is, I'm just going to select everything in my graph editor. Instead of, like, the reason we can see that is because we can see infinity. We have view infinity turned on. So if you can't see that, go to view, make sure infinity is checked. But right now, infinity is set to constant. And so what I'm going to do instead is under curves, I'm going to go to pre-infinity, and I'm going to set that to cycle. I'm going to go to curves, post-infinity, and set that to cycle. And so now what you'll see is on these curves, after I'm at the beginning and end of this, right? At the end of this curve here, it just flows right back into the beginning of this curve here, right? And so that means if I go way back here to the beginning, I can just hit play, and it's just going to always play this cycle animation. What this will allow us to do is find areas where it's not cycling perfectly, right? It'll allow us to clean those up. Now, the other thing I want you to realize is this is an efficient motion, right? Like I said, this is something that you've practiced for years, like generations or decades even. So we're not as sloppy at it as the 5-year-olds are. Even if like I'm not athletic, I still try to not waste too many of my calories, right? That's just our habit as humans. And so we should expect that we're going to start seeing patterns in these curves, right? So if I choose my translate y, that's my character moving up and down, right? And you'll see that pattern is just this like wave. Now it's not going to be a perfect symmetrical wave, but it is going to have like a very similar pattern. Like we have these low parts that hit at the same time. We have these high parts that both hit at these peaks. Maybe one's a little higher than the other, but that's okay, right? I can adjust how this works just by playing around with these curves, right? I can choose these two keys here, which is how my character starts heading back toward the ground, and I could give her just a little bit more hang time in these two right here, right? And so now she's going to like kind of hit the ground a little harder. So you see that's got a little bit more like punch to the way she lands. The areas we want to watch out for are areas that seem to break that pattern. And I will say, like, this is one of the biggest things that is a problem with cycles, right? Is if I go to my translate x, like that's not making a pattern, right? Like that looks weird. Like what is this supposed to be doing? And so what I can do to clean this up is try to figure out what the pattern is. My translate x is my side-to-side motion, right? And so since I said my character's hips are going to shift from side to side with each step, I would expect that it has two values or two peaks and it's transitioning in between those. But I have this one errant keyframe here that's incorrect. So to fix that, I could probably go through here and do something like this, and this is going to feel a little bit more accurate, right? And again, that's a very small shift, but it's going to make the side-to-side motion feel a little bit better. Right. You'll see this all over the place. My translate Z, she doesn't really go forward and backward very much. My rotate Y, though, like this curve just seems like a mess. Like what is it even supposed to be saying? And so I try to look for my pattern, what's happening here. My rotate Y is my character's forward and backward rotation. And so I think what I was doing when I was posing it is I was having her lean back just a little bit as she came in for her contact pose, right? I wanted this to be leaned back just a touch more. And so to kind of ease into that, I could start doing something like that. And now we're getting a pattern. However, we're still getting these flat points on the top here. So I could go in here and adjust that up, and now I'm getting more of a reasonable pattern. Now here's what you'll see though, how I flow from the end of this into the beginning of the next one has a little bit of a flat spot. And that's why we do this, is so I can go in here now and make that flow even better. So I get something like that. Now this is a very small change that I'm making, but these changes will add up to make my character feel like it's a little bit like where we won't even be able to see the point at where it loops. Z, that's actually looking pretty good. So now I'm okay with my root control. I can start moving down the character in the same way I do all of my splining, right? So I usually do my feet next and then go up the spine. Now I'll show you one more thing in this areas where we can kind of see things mess up. Sometimes it's like the arms. So we'll see this rotation back and forth. We get this little flat spot in here. You see that? And I think that what we're getting there is, oh, there we go. I think what we're getting there is just a little bit of a hitch. And so cleaning these up will make that flow a little bit more smoothly, right? And so we'll see this is where the arm is moving forward. And so I could do a little bit of something like that. Just make that just a little bit stronger, right? And we're going to start to reduce the number of little hitching moments that we see throughout this animation. But one of the other reasons I wanted to show you this is because we can use this looping sequence that we have here to offset things. Okay, so one of the things that is really difficult in a cycle is you may just be animating a cycle that is like 15 frames long. This one's only 25 frames long, right? That doesn't seem like it's enough time to get all that overlapping action in the arms. So I can show you though that you can. If I go to my arms here, right, I just need to grab all of these curves right here and recognize that right now I'm going from frame 500 to frame 24 or 524. So that's 25 frames long, but it's a cycling 25 frames. So that means I can shift all of these curves in my timeline as long as I don't make them longer or shorter, right? So if I were to grab all of the arm keys, let's just get the arm, the forearm, and the wrist, right? All of these, I can go in here and now make all of that happen one frame later, right? And it's still going to cycle because frame 50 and frame 524 are still exactly the same, right? So does that make sense? Now that arm is happening a frame later. Now what we can't do, what you have to be really careful with on this, is this has to have 25 frames in it. If I were to just grab this endpoint and make it happen later, well, that may seem okay for this first cycle, but you'll see that 500 and 524 are not the exact same, and eventually this animation is going to get really wonky. So if I just hit play on it, like eventually her arm really starts to mess up, right? And then like it doesn't make sense anymore. And that's because the range of keyframes that are cycling is no longer 25 frames long, right? And now it's like 60 or something. I don't know, I didn't look at how long I dragged it forward. So it's a really handy tool. You just have to be careful with it. I will tell you, I can kind of say this now, but like in the past, one of the art tests was to animate some form of creature, like a spider or something like that. And the trick to that is you animate all of the legs doing exactly the same thing. You set it to this cycle setting here, and then you just offset individual legs, right, in the same way. And so it's like this is a really handy way that you could work with that. You just have to be careful not to mess it up, right? The cool thing is when we export, if we export frames 500 through 524, it's going to sample every one of those anyway, and so it's still just going to export out a perfect cycle. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, there's one last thing I want to talk about. This one gets a little confusing, but it's really Like this is kind of like, this may not even make sense to you until after the project is over, or after you're animating a couple of run cycles after this one, right? Like maybe the third run cycle you're animating, you'll be like, oh, this makes sense. But try to keep up with me anyway. Our character inside of Unreal is running in place, right? And then we move that capsule that is driving that character, we move that around the scene at a specific rate of speed. And if you'll probably remember in Unreal, it was set to default at like 600. Well, what that 600 means is 600 units per second. And a unit in Unreal should be the same as a unit in Maya. So that means I can see how to make my animation not have any foot sliding, right? So I'll show you what I mean by foot sliding. If I go back into Unreal, I'm just going to drag some sort of map on here just so you can see it. Let's drag, none of these actually look great. Let's drag that on there. Give it a second to build. Let's drag something we can see better. There we go. Now if I hit play on this, I think I have her speed like something crazy. But you can see what happens when she hits the ground. It feels like her feet are sliding around, right? It doesn't feel like her feet are staying contacting on the ground. The way I can change that is I can go to this third person blueprint, and under this character movement inherited, it's right down here. I think I have her max walk speed set at 1500. I'm going to set it at something closer to 400, right? Hit compile, save, bless you. And you should still see that when she runs though, like her feet still kind of feel like they're not sticking to the ground. Right? So one of the ways that we can address that is to make them look like they're sticking to the ground when she's running at the right speed. So I set it to 400 units a second. Let's try to see if we can make that work. So right now, I'm going to move her placement controller 400 units in a second. The way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to delete all of the keys except for the key on frame 500. Right, that's the starting key. And then 1 second of animation is how many frames? So 24 in film, how many in games? 30, right? So I'm going to go to frame 529. I'm going to hit S to set that keyframe. And then on my translate Z here, I'm going to go ahead and set this to, I can type it right here. I'm going to go ahead and set that to 400, right? And so now we should be able to see what that run looks like, kinda, right? So there's a couple of errors in this. One is it's slowing down at the beginning and the end. The other is, even though I'm having this cycle forever, she just goes back to the beginning of the run at the end of this. And that's because the first frame and the last frame don't match up. They're different, right? And so you can see that happening in this curve. Basically, this curve just keeps going back over and over again down through here, right? So that's because it's set to cycle. If I go to this curve and say post-infinity cycle with offset, that curve is just going to continue climbing upward. And if I go to curves pre-infinity cycle with offset, we'll do that. And now if I just grab those two keyframes and set them to linear, now she's just going to run forward forever. Okay? Now, how I can test this, how I can make this feel like there's not any foot sliding, is sort of two things. If I go in here and look, as I scrub through here one frame at a time, her foot hits probably about frame, let's say 497, and you can see it hits right about where the grid is. But as you see we go forward, it continues to slide forward. So if I wanted it to look like there was no foot sliding, that would mean right there as her foot comes off the ground, it really needs to be like back here somewhere, right? And that's going to be kind of hard to make happen, right? The other element of that is that it's just a weird slip there to make that happen. But if you look at this on Translate Z, what we would get is basically from this keyframe, where her foot is contacting the ground, to this keyframe, because my placement controller is moving linearly forward, that would mean I would need her foot to move linearly backward to be a perfect counter animation to my forward motion, right? So I can fight with this. This is really kind of difficult, but how I would do this is I would go to this keyframe, I would set this to linear, I would go to this keyframe, would set this to linear, and then I would go here and I would try to make this sort of a perfect line. Right? Now that's not perfect, so I'd probably also go in here and maybe try to lower those two together. Oh, let me have that one selected. Something like that. And then maybe that would actually work a little bit better. So let's see if that looks. So now it's a little better, right? I also feel like she needs this is just more animation stuff. I feel like she needs a little bit of a kickoff back here at the end after she goes through. So I'd probably just add that in as extra keyframes. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. You'll probably see it a little bit better with this other foot. If I grab this other foot, it's from here to here that it has to stay in the same place, right? And so what I could do is just delete this keyframe in between and set both of these tangents to linear, and now it's moving in a straight line when it hits the ground there and there. And I can adjust the distance between my contact and my push off in order to make that feel like it's staying in the same spot. I'm kind of still not quite getting it, but it's getting closer. So you can kind of see now that feels a little bit like it's sliding less. If you want to test that out, one of the ways you can do it is you can create a locator. A locator is just a little tick mark that you can see, except you can't see it because I have show turned off. So I'll turn on my locators. I would move this to like the tip of the toe, right? And I would want it to look like that tip of the toe sort of stays in the same place the whole time, right? So what I would do is maybe this part of it right here, maybe it would go a little further forward. There we go. So you see now it feels like that's sticking in place, right? Now once you have all of that, all I have to do is delete the animation that is on this. I don't even really have to delete it. I can just take this and zero this back out. And so now I have that run cycle on a stationary character. But this stationary character will look like they're running correctly at 400 units a second. Now, why this is an important trick is because when you get an assignment from someone, if you do a job and they're like, we have this character, they're running around the scene, they are going to be the ones that tell you the character's run speed. And sometimes it's ridiculous. I did some stuff for Battleborn. Their run speed was 1,200 units a second, like 4 times this, right? And they had to be able to run at that speed forward, sideways, and backwards, right? And I couldn't be like, could you just slow the characters down? Because that would affect gameplay, right? The game says these characters need to be moving at this speed, so that needs to be how you do it. A couple of things you can do to change that. You can change the animation speed a little bit. You can make your animation faster. That way their feet are on the ground less amount of times, or less amount of time. Or you could change your stride length, like how far your character their stride is. But if this is what we have, I'm going to go ahead and re-export this. So I'll go File, Game Explorer. I'm actually going to change my exports to exports 2 because I'm doing 2 different versions of this all along. I'm going to export out my run exports. What? No clip is selected for export. Oh, I thought I clicked it. Export. Yes, I want to replace that run. Export successful. And so now if I go to Unreal here, and I go to my animation, I right click on this run and say re-import. Successfully re-imported. So we can go ahead and save that. If we look at it in here, so that's the run we just animated in here. Again, this is not finished for me. There's still more I would do to this, but it's getting there. And so now if I hit play, when she runs around my scene, it's going to feel a little closer. And of course, this is completely realistic. Okay. Any questions? Lots of questions? Did that get confusing? I don't know. Hopefully that was helpful. I have to say, I've never really, like, this is something that I kind of had to figure out the hard way on the job. I've never really seen a tutorial about how to do that. So hopefully this is something that comes in handy in making yours look more realistic in the game engine. At the very least, you realize that that's what that placement controller is for now, right? And that's one of the ways you can use it. If you don't have any questions, I'm actually going to go ahead and call it. The rest of the class is yours to keep working on stuff. I know some of you will probably have questions or need feedback or whatever. And so I'll just kind of hang out here until the end of class to help you with that. Otherwise, class is yours. Thank you all. My thumb makes a cracking noise when I do that. The end.